It always stops abruptly. Hi, welcome to Awakenings Within, Thursday night edition.
Mm-hmm.
How's it going, Bob?
Well, I want you to know something,
What's that?
that there's a football game on tonight.
No.
I know nobody in Kansas City cares.
Oh.
But this cheesehead from Wisconsin
No.
will let you know that if we go past 7:30, my head's going to be doing this.
Oh, there you go.
The TV's going on. So if you see this, that means we've gone over.
Man.
How are you?
I'm okay. Yeah. I'm getting through this week. How about that? How about you?
Well, you know, it's kind of funny. I have a different way of looking at things. I have, I guess over the course of my journey, I've become so citizenized in the kingdom of God that I sort of see all these things that are happening on earth and
Yes.
and I get a little bit kind of, especially when I see the whole Christian community getting into anxiety about things, you know?
Oh, yes.
I posted on my Facebook this week, it's like, basically what I was trying to say was it really doesn't matter who's president because Jesus will always remain king, right? Your family's still your family. Yes. Your friends are still your friends. The church you go to is still your church. Like all of these things, like 99% of the things in our life.
Yes.
They're not elected. They're choices we make.
That's right.
They're relationships that we have, and they don't change because one person did it. One person, you know what I mean? And I feel like yelling at the top of my head. Get some perspective here, people.
Yeah. So let's say hi to Heather and Dr. B. But I want to flash up my favorite scripture for this type of thing before we introduce our guest. So there we go. We walk by faith, not by sight. Corinthians 5:7, right? I mean, right now that's what we need. And I just got to keep my head up, got to keep the chin up. I mean, we can't control any of this. I mean, none of it. So
and very little of it, I mean, only very small portions of it actually impact all the meaningful things of value in our lives. Yes. You know what I mean? Yes. I guess depending on your value system, but to me, I value my relationships more than anything else. And so none of those are going to get affected by anything.
So Dr. B wasn't mad about what we were talking about. He's mad about this. How come it's saying, welcome, Michael Jones?
Oh.
Which brings us, we should actually probably bring our guest on. I guess it would be nice of us. Wow. He's in the green room right now eating some green M&Ms, right? Is he back there eating?
We need to put a disclaimer on this?
He's eating M&Ms, right?
We need to put a disclaimer on this that the views expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect because we're getting ready to go in the ring, and we don't know what's going to happen. Mike could throw a haymaker.
Hi, Larry. And I was going to have a big diamond for him on here and I just didn't get that graphic up. So anyway, without further ado, let's welcome our guest tonight, Michael Jones. And I'm going to let him introduce himself and we're going to add him right now. Welcome, Michael. Hello.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yes.
It's so weird to sit on this side of the, I'd like to be typing away right now while I'm on. And I comment on myself.
Exactly.
So yeah, sorry. There's no diamonds. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Exactly. So I was telling him the other day, I said, if you come on the show, one of the things we got to do with our guests is we like to give our guests, our listeners context in who the heck people are. So I told him he's going to have to get a little autobiographical sketch. So
why are we having Michael on as a guest?
No, but who is Michael?
Who is he?
Yes.
First, we
want to know who is Michael? Like, who is he? Where did he originate? Like, what corner of the world did he emerge from?
Yes, Michael.
And why is he who he is now? See, I'm curious because for people that don't know, Mike's quite the entrepreneur. You know, he's done some amazing things in his life, and he's built quite a few things. But it didn't start there; it ended. It's that's part of the process, but it started somewhere. So where did it start?
Let's let him say. Oh no, wrong person. I needed to switch you over. How about that? Isn't that nifty?
There we go.
So go ahead. Welcome.
First of all, just to clarify, this is a Christian show, right?
Yes.
Well, because I just recently had a conversion to Buddhism, so I'm going to be changing it.
Oh gosh. Okay. It's a spiritual show.
Hey, for those of you who are the regulars on here, you'll appreciate I had to make at least one silly joke because I can't type it. So,
can you see the comment there?
Yes, I can.
I have noticed you're sort of morphing into looking more like Buddha these days.
Oh, well, that's good. Yes,
yes, you're taking after your mentor.
I am. I'm trying to fashion myself after it.
There you go.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I was born here in Kansas City, lived my entire life here, grew up in South Kansas City, and I went to William Jewell.
What high school did you go to? Come on.
Center High School.
So what's the mascot there?
Yellow Jackets.
Oh, the Yellow Jackets. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've had a very traditional childhood, and we were the kind of family that went to church once or twice a year. Really no religious upbringing, not really any Christian friends growing up. And I think the thing that probably defines me now so much is the fact that the way I became a Christian was a little bit different path, in that I started having questions as a child about the meaning of life. I would read history, and I literally had, when I was probably 12 years old, this thought verbatim that the people who lived 4,000 years ago, their life and their family and their work and everything that life on earth had meaning to them, and it meant as much to them as mine does to me and all of my aspirations. How will I escape their fate, and how will I find meaning in life? That's how I began this faith journey. And so I, not being able to drive, had my mother bring me up to the local library. I would study different religions, trying to find something that rang true. Ultimately, I ended up stumbling across a book by C.S. Lewis called Mere Christianity, which was basically a work from someone who had been an atheist who went out to disprove Christianity, and without even using the Bible, just literally using the natural law and our own human experience, proved to himself and to many others, including myself, that there was a God and the nature of who this God was. And I also read Ecclesiastes. That was my book. There's a scripture that says that God put eternity in the hearts of a man or a person, but in such a way they could not find out what came after them. And so I suddenly realized that these urges I had to live forever, not die, have meaning. I began to frame what God had to look like, that there had to be a way that my life had assigned value, that it had to mean, I had to mean something to him, that there had to be something personal. So that's the pathway that, how I became a Christian.
Oh, that's great. Wow.
So you had that pull in you even when you were young towards spirituality.
Yeah, I was I was in late grade school, 6th grade to 7th grade. So I would bring my friends. My parents had no idea. I was actually the first Christian and the first college graduate in my family. I mean, when I was 18, my cousin tragically died, and because no one knew any Christians, I ended up having to preach at a funeral for a couple hundred bikers, because they didn't know any preachers. So Christian friends or relationships. So that's when I would bring my friends to my room and talk about the gospel of nothingness. I mean, really, of you're nothing. Your life means nothing without God. And I have a lot of friends who, during those times, and not just myself, but others, some of my mutual friends with Bob ended up, a lot of those folks are in the kingdom and Christians. And so that's how I got my start.
So, wow. So who do you think, looking back, who were the influencers? I mean, there's always typically, obviously C.S. Lewis, you mentioned that. Who else? I mean, were there people here in Kansas City that had an impact on your journey?
Yeah, I would say it like this. And Bob, you know my history pretty well, but I started out in a very relationship-oriented church called Colonial Presbyterian. Very much this ministry that I believe still goes on called Ichthus, which was a localized version of Young Life. Oh. And a lot of fun, basic gospel. I ended up in a charismatic church and was a very cutting edge charismatic church where I was at for about a decade. And then I had a theological swing. As I look back, you don't realize these things are happening when you're in the middle, but I had a theological swing where I flew all the way over to become basically a Calvinist and into Reformed theology. I went from folks who were, wearing Hawaiian shirts and shorts and T-shirts to a group that, was in bow ties, all dressed up, very stodgy. It was an incredible swing. And so there are lots of different authors along the way. I really got into a lot of the original, founding fathers of the faith, if you will, of Protestantism. John Calvin, there's a Welsh preacher, Martin Lloyd-Jones.
Did you play football for Dwayne Unruh?
No, he left right before I got there. So
okay, because I from my recollection, a lot of our mutual friends that are older than us that went to Center High School, he was quite an influence on a lot of young guys.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
In fact, his son Kip was the one who, when I was in the 7th grade, by some, I was the, captain of the football team in junior high. And so he was looking for the influencer, and he was 4 years older. So that's how I even got into anything kind of organized, through kind of reaching out to me. So.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Dwayne was the coach at Center High School for many, many years. And I think there's a lot of young guys who look back in their life, and this guy was like a father. He was coach, but he was like a father figure to so many. A lot of, he's kind of a stalwart. And then, of course, over at Colonial, you had Bob A. Leitner, some of those older guys like that as well. So,
so what happened to you like college on? So
I went through a unique period in college. I was, I had really, if you can see this, I had applied my own mind, if you will, to this belief system that I came to believe mentally. And I really believed in my heart. But when I went to college, I ended up starting a Bible study when I was a sophomore, I believe. Mm-hmm. And my college experience, I went from being the homecoming king, most likely to succeed, captain of every sport I was in, president of this, to literally having the reverse happen. And that, I won't go into all the ways, but I went to a Christian college, and I was all set to play ball at MU, and I made a last minute decision because, hey, it's Christian college. I want to go and be with other Christians. And they had a great football team at the time and had played for the national championship. And so I made this flip, last minute on my own without really any input or guidance from my parents. They didn't know how to, direct me. And so I ended up there, but, I was really a serious Christian, and I found myself with a bunch of PK kids and missionary kids who were running so far from God.
Oh, no.
I was the outcast, oddly enough. I was the odd guy out, we know all that. We grew up with all that. So I ended up starting a Bible study. I'd have in a 1,000-person school, I would have 40 people coming and hearing me speak. My roommate and I started, who's actually a local surgeon here now. And and I got in trouble with the Baptist school because I was going to the charismatic church.
Oh, no.
But I went through a very significant experience, which I would say for anybody watching this that has ever had doubts, I ended up going into sociology class. And in that class, I'd been so alone and so isolated other than Young Life and Ichthus. And, and suddenly was in this, this charismatic church only for a little bit of time, for a couple years, not a lot of theology background. And suddenly I encounter this reality that there's tribes in the Amazon who have never heard of Christ. And oddly enough, I went to Bob even back then because he was a pastor of the church and tried to get some understanding. And I went to others and I read and I tried to understand, I was very troubled that the way that I thought the gospel worked was that God couldn't reach people who would not, come into contact with Christians. That was really what I'd come down to. So I was like, the tribe just got discovered. They have no, and I would talk to different people and they'd say, well, we've made so much progress. Like, I want to know what happens to the person who's dying right now, who died yesterday, who's never met a missionary, who's never read the Bible. What happens? Do they go to hell? Well, we don't really know. Well, that's not enough. So it came to a point ultimately when I was a junior that I was doing my best in the sense to be a good soldier. And I came to a point that I literally was just so fed up with the torment that I had in my soul that I was on my face and I was screaming at God. And I said, if you're not just and fair, I would rather die with the wicked. I would rather go to hell and perish with those who are perishing if you're not fair. And I said, I want answers. I want you to answer my question. And I will not believe until you answer my questions. And I heard a voice that wasn't physical, but it struck me on the inside like lightning. And it said, until you believe, I will answer none of your questions.
Oh.
And I got up and I was literally changed. It was the most amazing internal experience.
Wow.
I literally if you ever read the book of Job, it's the most amazing book because Job is fighting all the way through. He's angry at God. He's demanding answers. He's demanding answers from everyone. Everyone around him is trying to answer his questions. When he finally sees God, whatever that means to you or to him, what happens? He doesn't ask God another question about why. He doesn't know that. He doesn't ever understand that we know in Job. Maybe God revealed it to him, but we're not told that, hey, he brought him behind the curtain like the Wizard of Oz and said, oh, this is what was happening the whole time. You were my example. He was satisfied when he met God. He was satisfied when he finally, and so that's why anytime I talk to friends, as much as I think apologetics, reasoning are valuable, I would tell anybody, if you don't believe in God or you're having struggles, this is all about a relationship. Get on your knees. It promises that you will be reached out to if you reach out, if you cry out with all of your heart.
Having an encounter, yes. To strive for an encounter.
That was my college experience, and I was,
that's good.
A wacky.
Awesome.
I was a Christian football player. I was on the football team, but I quit my senior year, and it was college for me was a time of death to self, really, and being alive to God.
Wow.
I first heard about William Jewell.
What's that?
Sitting on a beam under the bridge that goes across the Missouri River. Huh? I was working. They were building a second bridge. They had on the south side. They were building two bridges for I-70, and there was two of us that were the youngest guys on the and the union guys working, and so they decided that we were young and dumb, and they lifted us out and stuck us underneath the bridge. And we got bored under there and we got talking. And this guy starts telling me that he goes to William Jewell. I never had heard about it before. But that was the first time I heard about it, sitting on a beam over the Missouri River.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know William Jewell.
Yeah. Well, they
think Liberty, I believe, right?
They're the Yale or the Harvard of the West or something like that. But
it's a strong Baptist college, isn't it? So
It was. Now I think it's pretty independent and not.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, they walked away from a lot of their Christian moorings. So
that's amazing. So I'm sure you have more of a story going forward. You know, there's a lot left from college to now, right? So
a little bit.
So anything you want to share through that journey, or?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's, you know, I told Sandy that I would, and Bob, that I thought talking about, you know, being a Christian in business is, you know, would be something that I would be comfortable talking about. I really think, though, that the topic for all of us, that all of us can relate to, is just finding our calling in God. And if you ever read Bob's book is great for that. I mean, and I particularly was someone who, because I didn't have my start in the church, so to speak, I wasn't birthed in the institutional organized church. I came into it from kind of a back door. So I naturally had, you know, I was loyal to the church I was in, but I naturally questioned things, and, you know, and I tried to make the church as much as possible more fit into my understanding and theology, rather than me feel like, well, I've grown up and I've always believed this, and I just thought outside of the box. But what I struggled with, again, without having a lot of training or context back in that time, was really what I was called to do, because I had really believed that I was going to be a pastor. In fact, the pastor at that charismatic church had one time told my wife, who was on the worship team, that your husband will be leading this church someday, which shocked me because I was in a small group. And you know, Bob knows this guy very well, but, you know, so, you know, and I didn't really understand that because I didn't feel like I was on any path to doing that. And there are all kinds of people ahead of me. And I struggled because this guy, the friend of mine, Kip, who had reached out to me in the 7th grade, we continued our friendship and ultimately ended up working together at my second job out of college, and then ended up working together in a fledgling startup business. You know, he started his construction business. And he and I would literally be in the same building as the pastors of that church, and we would be there. We would meet at 5 o'clock in the morning to pray regularly. If we both weren't there, we owed each other $1. You know, if I didn't make it, he didn't make it. We went to Minor Park and prayed. And
is that a practice you still do in your company?
I still pray. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I get up at 5 a.m. and pray all the time.
Well, one of the things, to put some things into context here, one of the things that made it interesting about that time period is the church we were all involved in was very, very passionate about seeing a move of God come to the United States. And so the focus from the majority of the leadership was, if you're young and talented, you belong on staff at church.
Right.
And in the middle of that whole dynamic, I ended up having my own sort of spiritual collision with God about the fact that actually most of what he does happens outside of church through people not in the ministry. And suddenly found myself going, I was like that one fish going the wrong direction. It's like, oops. But
and this would be the same church as mine,
I found myself
right?
in an odd situation because the staff that I was on were like looking at me going, huh? You know, like I was so out there. So I ended up hanging out with a whole bunch of young guys, you know, a little bit older than Mike, who were all guys being told they needed to be on staff at the church, telling them, no, you don't understand. God's got a calling for you, and it's out there, right? Well, the amazing thing about it is almost every one of these guys who were all in our early 20s are all, look back like Mike, have gone on to be very successful businessmen. And
great.
have taken their Judeo-Christian values, worldview, and all of that into the marketplace. And that's what I'm interested in Mike's situation, because he was one of those guys that was caught in that ministry business. You get caught in this secular sacred tug of war. You know what I mean? And so many people are made to feel guilty that if you go out and build a business empire, you're carnal, you're backslidden, you love mammon, this whole thing. And I was trying to get all these guys to understand that's not true. So I'm fascinated by his story, because here's a guy who thought he should be on staff at church, and his whole journey takes him in a different direction, where he's probably impacted far more people than he would have ever.
That's exactly, yes.
From the church perspective. So I wanted to put some context in that, Mike, so that as you're sharing what's happened to you, you sort of discovered this whole journey into business. It wasn't like you were planning to go there.
Well, isn't it good that you're striving for that journey in the church because of the learning piece of it? I mean, I think that was advantageous to me as I was striving, thinking I was going to be in ministry like that too. So, I mean, I think you learn a lot. I mean, I think it's a great journey, but like you're saying, I want to hear, how that all turned. What happened?
So I worked for my friend Kip, and we ended up literally having, it was just kind of a crazy time. He had decided to start a construction business. Neither of us had any experience. Ended up building houses and doing remodeling and doing projects. Ultimately, one way or another, Kip, we just ran out of work. Now, later on, Kip became wildly successful. He's like the Baron of Grandview, Missouri. If you go downtown, he's developed lots of it. He's built camps, all kinds of stuff, but he had no work for me. And I literally, from this standpoint of faith and with my understanding at that time, I hung in there, and I was newly married, had small children. In fact, my oldest daughter remembers me. I had my car repossessed. And she remembers me when she was, 4, maybe, taking her to get groceries at the store. My mother-in-law had to come and loan money. It was really difficult and humiliating, because I felt like I had really been following God. And it's not that I hadn't been, but there were pieces of my understanding that were missing. And so the pivotal story that happened after this, cataclysmic downfall, if you will. And so keep in mind, my first job when I was 25 and 6, I worked at my friend's landscape business, and I was managing literally, 40 men who were, in 12 crews who, I just literally rose right to the top of the company. Just like that. I just instinctively knew how to organize, manage, build. I just was a blueprint thinker. And I went from division to division, and ultimately was in charge of, about half the company. And at that time, I had come across a way to do, I'm telling you a little bit, I'm backtracking a little because I'll get back around to this, but I found a way to do snow removal by outsourcing using subcontractors, and no one in Kansas City had done that. And in order to save my friend's business that had failed right before I went with Kip, I ended up having to outsource just to try to do the snow removal work that they had. And so I didn't have enough employees and equipment to do it ourselves. So I went out and found subcontractors. And we came in within a percentage point of their profit margins. And I suddenly knew, bam, the entrepreneur in me was like, that'll work. But then I went to work with Kip, pocketed that thought for a while. And as Kip and I were there I worked with him about 1.5 years. So now I'm about, call it 3.5, 4 years into my career. And I'm, and things have failed, and I don't know what to do. So I got in my car that I had newly got back from the bank. And I took one day. And football was always, I thought when I was growing up, I was going to be an NFL football player, a pastor, a lawyer. That's what I thought I would be. Mm-hmm. So, and it was a very hard thing to realize that I was too small for some positions, not fast enough for others. and that I made this decision to go to William Jewell, and I was just frustrated that I hadn't gone and tried to play at bigger places. My friends said, you would have played here, you could have started here. And there's this part of me that was just, so connected to being an athlete that was my base kind of. And I still would say that I tell anybody today. I mean, I've told that to people in the last 3 months that I do business like I played sports. It's sport. It's competitive. It's fun. There's a team, get a game plan together, go out there and win and have fun doing it. But I ended up going, first of all, to my college football field, William Jewell, and I'm just driving around the city praying. And I go up there, and I'm trying to find my way back to how did I have such a, jet propulsion out in my career. And I'm looking to God for answers, because like I had such early success early on, things that were said, things that I did. And here now I'm almost bankrupt, trying to be loyal to my friend, trying to follow God and praying at 5 o'clock until 7 o'clock most mornings. How'd that happen? And I just was like, I didn't understand, and I needed to know what to do. Mm-hmm. I didn't so much care with a family how much I got there, but I needed to know what to do. So I went to my college football field, back to my high school football field. And by the end of the day, I ended up at my Pee Wee football field where I had played when I was a little kid. And it was now in the, late afternoon, in all the open fields. I was the only one out there. I think it was it was a weekday, so no one was there, of course. And there were all these banks of trees, all these hedgerows of trees, all lining up the fields. And as I sat there in the stands just praying, to God alone belong the escapes from death. And I look out and I see thousands of birds in that late afternoon sun swooping down and pecking around in the dirt, looking for worms. And I just sat there watching them. And suddenly, I believe, I want to say, don't hold me to this quote, but I think it's Matthew 5:10, where it says, you have little faith. Look at how God takes care of the birds of the air.
Right.
Now, I'd read that like probably most Christians multitudes of times, but suddenly I realized like this burning, blazing truth that went across my mind, that the birds actually were putting their beaks into the ground to find worms. There weren't worms lying on top of the ground that just like, hey, just go pick a worm up from the ground. You don't have to do anything. The worms weren't dropping from the sky into the trees to the little birds' mouths opening. And, and in fact, these birds had to actually work. And yet, oddly enough, other than birds' untimely death or death by predators, somehow there weren't dead birds, thousands of birds. They weren't falling from trees dead. And so I'm like, I suddenly realized that this idea, which in this church was hard to get a handle on this. And I knew I was leaving the church in this moment. And that's when I suddenly put faith with works together. That to me is a perfect picture of faith with works. And that does not mean, I've told the story lots of times, it does not mean that God does not sometimes drop words from the tree right in your mouth. Right. It does not mean that he won't put them on the ground for you. And it doesn't mean he won't take you out of the nest at times. But the normal course of life, this is the way we have to live. We have to exercise ourselves, exercise our faith. We have to walk. And I said, and I literally got up, just like when I was in college, I literally stood up and said, I will put my beak in the ground as soon as you show me. So I ended up going home. And I had that tucked away, and I was praying like, God, I'm waiting for you to show me that, because I knew I'd heard from God. And I ended up over at my parents' house, and this verse is emblazoning in my head, and I end up seeing out the back door a guy on a roof, and this guy was up there. Looks like he was uncomfortable, and I just feel this prompting to go talk to him. So I walk out my parents' gate through this common area over to this guy, probably, 100 yards away. And I said, what are you doing up on that roof there? And he said, well, there's been a massive hailstorm that's come through Kansas City. I'm from Chicago. I usually deal with small claims. And he said, I'm here having to, fill in as a roofing estimator, and I don't know anybody in town. I'm out here trying to take measurements. And he goes, "Are you a roofer?" I said, "Yes, I am." So I ended up following this guy throughout the city and throughout my old neighborhood I grew up in, literally figured out how to bid roofs, figured out how to, how the whole system worked. I was working pretty much from 4 to 6, and I went from, being about $8,000 in debt to making at that time, $2,000 or $3,000 a week working part-time, contracting out roofs. All kinds of things related to hail, deck damage. And I ended up starting a small roofing business from that.
Oh, wow.
I painted some, and then I ended up starting a painting business. And then I came. This is where I came. I can pause here if you want, but this is where I then start really the business I'm in now. But that was my journey. So I became an entrepreneur because I had to do something.
Right.
And I was enough in debt that I was like, in my mind, okay, I'm going to be working until I'm 40 years old, and it's going to take this much. It wasn't that big of a deal. But in my head, it was huge because I just didn't want that debt. So I ended up, that was how I ended up my first starting business.
Wow.
So would you agree that business is basically supplying people with either a product or service that they need?
Well, I think
very general.
There's multiple definitions. That is true.
Then what happens is that, at least as I look back over history and look at people's stories that are very similar to you, the thing that separates most people from being an employee or an employer is their capacity to see opportunity. In other words, you were looking for something, and you saw opportunity, and you seized it. You carpe diem. Like there was, it's like, I'm laughing because you're telling the guy you're a roofer. It's kind of like Bill Gates when he sold the PC, and he didn't even have an operating system. You know what I mean? It's like, right. It's like, I don't know how many Jewish guys that I've been with walking into meetings who will tell people I can do it, even though they have no experience in it, and they go out and figure out how to do it.
Fake it till you make it.
Well, it's like the old Jerry Kramer or Vince Lombardi quote, "Run to daylight." It's like you saw daylight and you were through there, where a lot of people will just stand there.
Right.
The interesting thing though is people there's this balance where, yes, you're doing the work, but what I would say is that as I look back at my life, that and I was telling this to one of my Christian managers today, that it's like, I'm a God-made man. I'm not a self-made man. Now I participated but I realized there's so much of who we are. Like, you don't decide what you look like, what you talk like, your experience, your parents, your country, the time you're born in, a lot of the friends, opportunities. There's so many things. There's things that you've avoided that you could have been taken out or hurt or injured or not had that opportunity. And so I like to say that there's a scripture in the Old Testament where it says that the Israeli army won because, they actually were winning because they were seeing God marching in the trees above them.
Right.
That's what I'm always looking for. Mm-hmm. If God's marching in the trees above me and I know it and I can sense it and I can feel it. And I think the sad thing is that that's not just an experience that business people have or entrepreneurs have. I was talking to this manager today, and he was telling me, and this guy's 35 and he's a believer. And he said, I had the most amazing thing happen. It's never happened to me before. He goes, I had this customer call me out of the blue. I've been praying for God to give me, new business. This person calls, and literally the resources called within an hour to do this new work right then. He put it together, goes, I'm just blown away. Now, I've been very encouraging to him, but then I thought to myself, like, that's really sad too, that this guy's been a Christian, and I'm trying to encourage him, like, should be regular. Now, it doesn't happen every day necessarily, but there should be this expectation that God is real, God cares about your life, and your calling, no matter what it is, if you're 90 years old and retired, your calling may change. Your calling might be to do something that's amazing and be a support to your family or your neighbors. And God is as pleased with that as he is with Bill Gates. That's what your calling is right now. You have breath on the earth. That's what you're to be about.
Right. Because you're walking in your purpose, but you have to seek after him to know your purpose. You have to have a dialogue with him for you to even know what the purpose is. It could be innate, right? I mean, some of us, have leadership qualities, that's how God made us, and just walking into that and how you're going to forward his kingdom is the question to be asking, not just forwarding your own. So, I mean, that's really, when he's in the midst of it, he's going to guide you. Even though you think it's you, like, okay, I've got to figure this out, but he's actually dropping things in for you. Right. So, sometimes you just need to get better at hearing him and his prompting.
Recognizing it. I mean, I ask myself all the time, what did Anna and Simeon have as they were sitting at the temple that they recognized the purpose of God in the cry of a little baby? Right. I mean, a little baby shows up, and both these people know that there's purpose in this child. So it's having those spiritual eyes to see that. I call it God's fingerprints. Sometimes that's all you get is you get these little fingerprints, like or breadcrumbs, like I need to follow that.
Right.
But it gives you a sense of peace when you know that you're walking with him, or he's walking with you, and you're following. It gives you that peace. That's why I know that we wanted to talk about what's happening, kind of going on right now, to help people with giving them peace, because he's the peacemaker. So if you're if you're in him and he's in you, that peace will fall. But if you're unsure, that's why it's really important to start following by faith. And so I just kind of wanted you to talk about that. I've been reading a couple books. I'm going to talk about this real quick. It's called The America's Providential History, and our founding fathers, and God talks about nations all the time and how he's going to rise, how they're going to rise and how they're going to fall. Right. So he has it in motion. In Acts 17, it talks about that. So, it's always happened, right, Bob? It's cyclical. It's, nations rise and fall. It's just, where are you in the midst of that? What does that look like for you? It could look like a nation is falling, but really, he's perfecting things sometimes. Sometimes we don't see that he's purifying it versus what you're seeing as ruins, right? Do you guys agree?
Yeah.
So, who knows, but you have to have a faith. You have to have assurance. I've been hearing the word abiding and assurance, those two words together a lot this week for whatever reason. I've been feeling the shift of being an empath too, and the kind of the, oppression, I guess you'd say, of what's been going on. But if you're assured and you're abiding, you're following, you're going to have a little more peace through it. Any words about that? Either one of you?
Well, yeah, I would say for me, I find myself on one hand, sadly, finding myself in a very natural view of, say, a political upheaval, of anywhere from being angry about things that might be happening, afraid about things that would be happening, uncertain, anxious, to, it occurred to me the other night, and I actually practiced this for about 3 or 4 hours, actually the night of the election, that I, like probably a lot of people, are waiting on pins and needles to see what's going to happen. Are there going to be riots and other things? That I literally just decided that, because I had this picture of Jesus, and I just read this actually, of Jesus being in the boat. The storms are raging. His disciples are coming down saying, "Lord, save us. How could you hear us asleep? We're getting ready to die. Waves are coming over the boat." And these are trained fishermen, and the threat was real. It wasn't a fake threat. But the entire time, they had the Lord of the universe in the boat with them. And as much as we're afraid, God is in the boat with us.
Right.
Yes. And it does not mean that we're not going to face turmoil, that we shouldn't prepare, that we shouldn't care about, to the contrary, we should care and be engaged in this world in all of those ways. But our first citizenship is with the kingdom, and it is the kingdom of heaven. And the fact is that when we come to what I would call a rational level of thought for a believer, that we should finally really turn to him and realize that things are in his hands, and we could actually turn off the TV, put down the news, lay aside our conversations and our anxiety, and actually go to sleep in the boat with them if we opt to at times. Doesn't mean that, so you can't take any of those and say, oh, this is the only thing in life, care about nothing and just go to sleep and God will take care of it. That's not, that even goes against the whole thing I talked about the birds. But in your heart, even while you're engaged, even while you're speaking, if you're speaking and you're operating from a place that's not from faith, you're just going to find yourself living in something other.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah. I'm for me, the word picture, the eye of the storm, that's always been a, for me, kind of the where I go. It's like there's this storm brewing, but in the center of it, there's calm. So I always head for the middle.
So what was their mission on that boat that day?
Well, they were just going across the lake to go to preach at the other side. And Jesus had been exhausted from ministering to people. And they'd started out, I believe, and things were calm. And suddenly it all picked up. So yeah, I think that the threat is real. The storm is real. Your fear is real. But in the middle of all of it, your faith is what, as you said, Sandy, in Acts 17, God's the one who establishes the boundaries of the nation in such a way that people will, if they will seek after him, will find him. Mm-hmm. He set our nation up in such a way. And if that's not our most important calling in life, then we're missing it, and we've got to get back to first things first.
Right.
Well, I posted this week, as we were talking earlier about, kind of putting things in perspective, but I sometimes just stop and go, okay, so if one person's the president or not, how many things in my life does that actually impact? Like, does it change anybody in my family? No. Does it affect any of my friendships? No. Does it affect my spiritual? No. Like, I start going through my life thinking about all the things that are important to me and what impact will that decision have on any of those things. And I realize, like, zip. Right. You know what I mean? And so then I begin to realize, well, wait a minute, I'm having anxiety about things that are more peripheral. Like, they're not at the core, of who I am or my value system. They're more on the periphery.
Right.
And depending on what happens, I adapt, which is what humans have been doing for thousands of years. You just adapt. So it's like, the Brits have a phrase, don't get your knickers in a twist. It's like, why are we all getting our knickers in a twist? You know what I mean? It's like, we'll figure it out. It's like in the eye, in this storm, go to the eye. The eye is your family. It's the core, right? The core of your life. Your core of your life is God.
Yes.
Your friends and your family. That's the core. That's what your life is really set on.
Right.
If you don't have those things, well, then yes, you're going to get tossed to and fro. But if your life is anchored in relationships, your relationship with God, your relationship with your family, and your relationship with your friends,
right,
you can have calm in the storm.
Right. Because even though any policies politically will affect economically or anything like that, as long as you have faith that you're going to have wisdom on how to navigate that, you're going to be fine, right?
Well, and then you also have to recognize that there's a truth. And the truth is the only constant is change.
Yeah.
And I've said this to you before on the show. If you study history like you are, what looks like a drunk guy coming out of a bar because it zigzags and there's action and reaction. And that's just history. So whatever happens next, there'll be a reaction to it in the future. So you just got to get used to it. You know what I mean? It's just, life is like the ocean. It ebbs and flows. It zigs and zags. It's always moving. And so if your life is based on, if your faith or your security is based on things being static, right, you're going to have a problem, because there isn't such a thing.
Yeah.
The only constant is change.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Amen. I agree with that. Yeah. Anything to add, Michael?
Good stuff, Bob. What's that movie from?
Where's my sign? I have.
Well, no, because it's like I see people, you know, they get insecure, right? They get fearful. But it's because, and then you look and it's because things are changing, and you're going, well, of course they're changing.
They're always changing.
They're always changing.
They're always changing.
We're changing. We're not the same people we were 10 years ago. And
right.
10
the seismic plates
right?
are underneath. The seismic plates underneath the earth are changing right now. Just saying.
Well, but it part of the problem, and again, and I don't want to get too weird here, but again, it's cultural. When you live in a country that's economically prosperous and has basically peace, we have infrastructure that just hums along. And so we have all these securities based on the fact that when I turn on the light switch, the lights are going to come on. When I turn on the water's going to come. The mailman's coming every day. I can go to the store and I can buy, like, there's all these we have all these securities. Well, most of the world doesn't live like that.
Right. Right.
So one of the things that you begin to realize is that part of our anxiety is because we're Americans. Right. And we have a system that's made us very comfortable in normal and these routines.
We don't want to be inconvenienced.
Exactly.
Right. We're afraid of our comfortability, you know, of not being inconvenienced. Just like at the great, you know, toilet shortage at the beginning of this pandemic.
Right.
I mean, people were losing their minds. I almost had to wrestle an old man, you know, like what? Where'd our civility go? Like what happened?
I I tell people 2/3 of the people in the world don't even use toilet paper.
Exactly.
And we're like having conniption fits because we don't have toilet paper. No, but I mean, it's sad, but in some ways for me that has sort of a global perspective. It's comical. I'm like looking at all these going, oh my God, like, look at us. Right. But you think about it. But we have the benefit of older generations. My mom's 94 years old. Right. She grew up with the Iceman coming. Right. Waiting for the Iceman to come so they could have cold refrigerator.
Oh, the refrigerator.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My lighting guy. You know what I mean?
My grandma called it ice box.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, people that are older have lived in a more unpredictable world. You think about diseases, right? It's only been since the Second World War that we all go to the doctor and get a pill, right, that fixes things. Because before the Second World War, most everybody died when they got sick. I mean, it's like that. Every day I'm on Facebook, and one of my African friends has lost a friend who's 30 years old. You know how many women there are dying every day just in childbirth? So I'm just saying, as Americans, we've become so conditioned to predictability. Our security is in our system.
Yes.
Right?
And that's when
we go through these moments and the system just starts shaking. We all are freaking out.
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky that we are able to talk about God like right now. I mean, we're, you know, there's other places you can't. It's going to be censored, you know. I mean, hopefully that's not going to be the way of this, you know, soon, but it could be, right? So you just got to you got to ride the wave of it, you know. You got to.
Well, one of the uncomfortable principles in Mother Nature is that resistance builds strength, and none of us like it. We all hate it. Except for that's how we all work out. That's when we like everything in life, right? And so it's like we're in a situation where there's resistance, and we're like, we're all whining about it. It's like, no, it makes us get stronger.
Yes.
Recognize what's happening. Resistance is good. Resistance builds strength. If you want to get into the fundamentals of the Christian faith, Christianity doesn't do well in economic and political prosperity. It's a movement that gets very powerful under oppression.
Right.
It's the reality of it. Under political and economic oppression, Christianity flourishes.
Yeah.
So, we Americans may think we're strong, but maybe God's trying to show us something about ourselves.
Yeah.
Maybe our Christianity is more American than it is kingdom of God. So, it's like, I think this is a really good time to do what, we were talking about is, you go through disillusionment and you react to it because none of us want to be disillusioned, right? Because we don't like the feeling, except for the reality of disillusionment is it's the discovery that something that you assumed isn't true. Isn't that a good thing? So, as God's in the middle of doing some things in our lives, and we need to embrace the moment.
Yeah.
Not fight it, embrace it.
Right.
So
that's where you find the peace.
Yeah.
I had, as you were talking, Bob, just this picture of of people in the middle of a storm, of a hurricane.
Mm.
Yeah.
And if you're not a Christian, you don't get to go into the eye of the storm.
No.
You can't. Your peace, your settlement, your security is in that storm going away, managing that storm, having a vessel that will sail through that storm.
Mm.
And it's not that you don't have to function in the storms of life, because you do, but for the Christian, the eye of the storm in their heart, the storm is around you all the time. It's business, relationships, politics, news, threats, financial hardships, all those things. But right here, right in the center, is the calm, is the eye of the storm that you can actually reside, you can retreat to. And inside of it, you can be exactly like Martha and Mary. You can be Mary. Because if you remember that story, Martha's out there doing really meaningful work. She's trying to prepare, a meal for the Lord, and she'd love to be sitting at Jesus' feet too. And Jesus actually said, Martha, Martha, troubled by so many things, but what Mary has won't be taken away from her.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to give ourselves that opportunity to be Mary. I'm not going to be someone who says, by the decree, have a quiet time, but you need to find yourself, even in the middle of your work day, retreating to that eye of the storm inside of you to find spiritual peace, find peace, believing that God is in control, that your life is in His hands.
One of the amazing things that I discovered through my own journey with losing some friends is how often people who are about to face death because of their Christian faith have extraordinary peace.
Yeah.
I mean, that's mind-boggling, because most of us won't even read the stories because they terrify us. They give us anxiety. But every story that you read about who of somebody who stood on principle for their faith and had to lose their life over it, every one of them died with this incredible peace.
Yeah.
And of course, the biblical writers call it a peace beyond understanding, meaning that it's irrational. It doesn't make sense. It's beyond human comprehension or even human initiative. It's something supernatural.
Natural. Yeah. Holy Spirit peace. The Holy Spirit. Yeah. Now, you were talking about Martha and Mary. I was a Martha for a long time. And I felt like I had to strive to be a Martha to have some perfection. So I was trying to get to be a perfect Christian. Like I was striving for that perfection, like Martha, like, doing all the things. And her story was perfect for me because I was always trying to be a Martha and not a Mary. And I never understood the concept on how to be a Mary. And it really was a question of worthiness that I did not realize that I didn't have. And it was because I felt unworthy. And so I was always a Martha because of that. And then finally, when that worthiness, came over me, that I didn't have to do anything to come into that peace. I didn't have to do one thing. I mean, God says, come, Jesus says, come, and that's it. You don't have to do anything. I mean, it's an action reaction, but you don't, you just have to accept. It's like an acceptance versus, me having to become a perfect Christian. Yeah. Do you guys have anything to say about that? I mean, that's been my journey.
Yeah. What jumps out is the Garden of Eden. What was the response when they fell and when they sinned, when God came calling? Shame. Yeah. It's thinking you're going to be able to do something to earn God's approval or his favor. And we're all born with that. We all have to fight shame and come back to a place of faith in Christ's work and not our own. Right. Christ is the one who lived the life you couldn't live and died the death you couldn't lie, that gets attributed to you free of charge. And you're accepted in that relationship. And I think a lot of us, this is what I love, Bob and I have talked lots, talking to different friends, that I think in today's world, there's a lot more Christians who are finally being honest about their failures, their sin, the things that scare them. And God knows all that. Come in with that.
Right.
Don't come in with, to God necessarily with, doesn't mean you don't come in with worship. There's no formula. God just wants you to be yourself. He's the ultimate person. He's the creator of people. His personhood is real, and you're in his image. And you can come in and say, I'm just scared out of my mind. I know what's going to happen. I'm afraid for my grandkids. I'm afraid for this. I'm afraid of that. Just come in and be real and pour out all of your cares on him, because he cares for you.
Right. Yes. Very good. Yes. And I think people make it too difficult. I mean, like you said, they think there's a formula. It's really just being walking to him and seeking him and accepting his love back. I mean, we do feel we're unworthy and have a shame coat and all of those things. I mean, when you look through all the Bible and all the stories, there's always, they did good, then they did bad, then there was a supernatural encounter that brought them back to righteousness, but it was all because God loved them. I mean, that's the theme of every story. There's a journey to all of that. I mean, I look at all the books and that way. They're stories to show his supernatural power and love. Also, that he will redeem you. He will love you regardless of what you've done and where you've been. And he's going to bring you through, but you have to believe that. And that's the only thing. You have to believe it and have faith in that. And that's kind of the whole theme, right?
Well said, Dr. Sandy.
So wow, we went really, I knew we'd go deep.
I know. I'm distracted now,
Huh?
I'm distracted now.
Oh, no, it's
and not only that, I missed a touchdown.
Well, I think that was good. Any closing points for you guys? Who's winning?
Oh, sorry, I'm just distracted. Sorry, you guys. I'm an addict. I'm an addict. Hi, I'm Bob.
That's okay.
I'm an addict.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll pray for you.
Thank you.
And Ken, if you're still on here, Ken is from the land down under. Nice. Thank you for saying that, Ken. And his daughter needs some prayers. So she's 13, and her name is Victoria. So if you guys throw up some prayers for her as she goes through a journey. So, anyway, wow, that was good. That was good. And again, just have peace through this, everybody. And if you have any questions, I know you can reach out to any one of us, correct? Sure. If you have any questions or you need to talk, and, we're here. So, we appreciate all of you, and we appreciate you guys showing up. And thank you, Michael, for being our guest tonight and not cracking too many jokes on us tonight. I'm sure you'll be back to your normal self next week, but
we need to have a part 2 with Mikey.
We do.
There's a whole story about.
Oh, I want Dr. B,
right?
Dr. B and him at the same time. We have to do that, Dr. B.
He'll just try to talk. He'll just try to talk over me.
Hi, Rose. Nice to see you. Another down under. Wow, we got some Australia going on there. So anyway, guys. Thank you guys. And any questions, keep your peace, everyone. We're going to get through this. It's going to be all right. So thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Bye-bye.